Hello, everyone. Jamin Shively, joined by my colleague and co-host Michael. How you doing there, Michael?
Doing well. Good to be here.
Awesome. Michael's coming at us from
North
Southeast
of Thailand.
Asia,
Yep.
From Thailand, and I'm coming at you from Seattle, Washington. So we're going to talk with you today, and we really want this to be a conversation. So really, imagine yourself right here with us because you will be right here with us, A, when you post your comments to this video, and B, when you say, hey, Michael and Jamin, can I join you on a video conference? And let's do that too, right? So really, truly think of yourself as a full-fledged part of this conversation. Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Happy to be having this conversation. Um, it's as we say, it's never been more timely because with each and every day that goes by, there's an even greater sense of urgency. So while I'm here in this beautiful setting, I'm also cognizant of the fact that not everybody has the luxury to be sitting on a couch at a cafe, drinking a brewski. So if we're going to be doing that, we might as well make the most of it and talk about what matters most.
That's it. That's it. Absolutely. And so to give a little kind of sneak preview, what I'd propose to talk about, and please take it in whatever directions you want as well. But what I propose to talk about is first the urgency, and I'm going to use a metaphor, an analogy of a man about to go off the edge of a cliff. And then out of that urgency derives another urgency, which is that we get together and figure out what we're going to do in the face of this, right? And that's not to suggest that we're necessarily going to solve this problem or solve that problem, because there's a lot of arguments that certain problems cannot be solved. Once species go extinct, they're gone forever, right? How do we solve that? For example. But so I'm not talking about solving, but I am talking about addressing. What are we going to do about it? Are we just going to twiddle our thumbs and go about business as usual for the remainder of our days as we go off over the edge of the cliff? What say you, Michael?
Well, that's what we're doing, right? As a species, lemmings, one after another, um, falling in line, falling off the cliff. I think a lot of I think a lot of what we're talking about is frankly taboo. It's kind of one of those those things that polite people around the dinner table don't talk about.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So with that as intro, it is just absolutely urgent that we talk about it, that all of us talk about it and figure out and co-create what we're going to do, who we're going to be in the face of it. Period. Right. And when I say who, what are we going to do about it? Who am I talking? I'm talking about all of humanity, because we all share the same planet, the same spaceship. And carbons that I emit here in Seattle affect everyone because they eventually spread around the globe.
Knows no borders or boundaries.
That's it. That's it. Any kind of contamination, pollution, destruction of habitat, which leads to extinction, and that habitat no longer performing its planetary duties, cleansing, regenerating, sequestering carbon, et cetera, et cetera. So everything any one of us does affects all of us, right?
Yeah, and the same goes for the economy, right? We live in a globalized economy, which has finally, caught up to the globalized ecology, which has always been there, but it's become more apparent that uh, nobody lives in a bubble. No single country can close its borders, right, to pollutants,
Yeah.
to toxins, to you name it, right? And the same has to be said for the economy. So I think at this point, yes, we live in a globalized world. In a certain sense, it's always been that way, but it's been brought to the fore, and so we can no longer act alone as individual agents of change. We have to act collectively.
Yep, exactly, exactly. And that's a great lead in to the metaphor I was going to use, is that we all share the same spaceship. So imagine a metaphor that that all of humanity is in this van. It's like a big van that's rapidly heading towards the edge of a cliff. And rather than figure out what we do in the face of that, do we steer to the left? Do we steer to the right? Hey, everybody, shift your weight to the right side. We're about to make a hard right turn, right? And we don't want to tumble over the edge of the cliff. Instead of coordinating like that, some coordinated action, whatever its odds of success or failure, that's a whole different conversation. I'm not even going to go there, right? That's for y'all who would immediately come back and say, "Oh, there's no hope. There's no hope." Well, hope for what? What is it you all are hoping for? So let's get clear on what's possible, right? As opposed to just having some, monoculture goal of saving humanity or, saving the world or something like that. There are portions that can no longer be saved. For one thing, a lot of Earth has just been killed, species, ecosystems, etc., ice, so many things. But so we're not necessarily talking about some monoculture goal. I want to be clear on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Michael, if you have any you'd like to throw in.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the individual versus the collective, right? We're talking about the parallax that is produced by varying perspectives. One culture has a certain set of values, right? Another culture has another set of values. But I think in all cases, there are overlapping values.
Yeah. Yeah. They're common values. They're things that make us human, that make all of us human, right?
And the predicament that we're all in as, planetarians or earthlings or what have you. Yeah. Because we're all in the same spaceship.
Exactly. So here we are all in this van, this spaceship that's barreling towards the edge of a cliff, far from working together in some coordinated action, whatever that may be. Again, let's leave the goal as just an open question, an open conversation at this point. But whatever their goal is, rather than coordinate toward achieving that goal, what are the people inside the van doing? Well, first of all, no one is at the steering wheel. Most people don't even have a notion that there is a steering wheel. And some people are fighting for a better seat on the van, for a window seat. Other people are observing what's happening and blaming this person and that industry and that government, etc. So there's a lot of blaming and finger pointing.
Backseat drivers.
A lot of backseat drivers. But A, nobody's at the steering wheel. Very few people even have a concept that there could be a steering wheel. And B, the entire van is it's acting like a bunch of individuals who don't really think that they can influence, where the van goes or whether they'll survive or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Influencing the outcome.
Yeah. It's like they don't even have any notion that they could be influencing the outcome. So they're just kind of riding it out. And, a small percentage of the people in the van are observing what's going on. They're looking out the windshield and they're saying, "Holy crap, we're fast approaching the edge of a cliff." People like Guy McPherson, James Hansen, many, many others. And they're trying to, articulate what they're seeing, but it's like some combination of, their voice is very hoarse, and or there's a lot of other distracting sounds going on from inside the van, from outside the van. There's a lot of noise. And so their message is just, it's kind of like, Alabama beat Georgia tonight in college football. You can imagine the final whistle ending the game, the roar, the cheering in the Alabama sections, right? Imagine whispering amidst all that cheering and roaring. Who's going to hear it? That's essentially what's going on. The cheering and roaring is all the advertising and, oh, Donald Trump tweeted this and Donald Trump tweeted that. And, oh, did the Russians, influence our elections, and all this stuff, all this chatter. That's the cheering and roaring about the spectacles of the day.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different conversations that are happening, right? That are taking place. But it's crucial that the voices that may be whispering in the dark, so to speak, right, aren't drowned out, by this cacophony, by the roar of the crowd, by all the distractions, that common living in a commercialistic culture like our own, that is selling to people, targeting certain insecurities, certain desires that people have, right, which really are valid, right? Some insecurity about whether I'm good enough, right? Whatever that means.
Sure.
Have enough money, have the right car, wear the right clothes, whatever the case may be. But as we look beyond that, we see that even that insecurity is part of a larger insecurity, right? And it's this myopic focus on the individual self that the system, I think, is based upon. The system where each individual, it's Adam Smith's version of Frankenstein, right? It's like, here's this machine that's supposed to, by everybody focusing on their individual needs and wants, is supposed to somehow, fulfill all of the needs and wants of the others, right? Well, as it turns out, that isn't true. So now I think it's the time to stop trying to be like the loudest voice, or for us to stop listening to the loudest voice, right? And to start having conversations about what is of most valuable, right, to us, not only individually but collectively, and not only collectively but individually, because the two are, I think that's the great. I think that's what has mostly obscured our relations to one another, is that our sense of self, our self-identity, comes from the world in which we live, right? The way we're raised, the family, the associations, who is it that we're trying to impress, and why, and right? And so I think just having these kinds of conversations, as simple as that may seem, really clear the ground, kind of open up a space for a new kind of collective conversation and even action to take place.
Wow. Great stuff, Michael. One of the things that's occurring to, I'm glad you mentioned Adam Smith, because he was the one who, at least history credits, if I'm not mistaken, with coming up with the concept of the invisible hand, right, guiding the economy. And I think that the invisible hand, in the case of our current predicament of runaway capitalism, runaway hoarding, and runaway raping and pillaging of Mother Earth and all of her resources and ecosystems and life-supporting systems, is this undergirding philosophy, right, that the more I hoard for myself, the better off I will be, right, with essentially no regard for anything else. Like when you look at
me and mine,
and without regard for how you accumulate what you accumulate. I mean, when they say who's the richest person in the world, or the top 10 or the top 100 or whatever, what's always listed is the dollar amount, right, or the U.S. dollar equivalent.
Net worth.
Net worth. It's like, get rid of all the nonsense, get rid of all the
how much more reductive, right?
Exactly. And the thing is, there is, your net worth is roughly correlated. There are exceptions, but it's roughly correlated with how much damage you've done to Mother Earth. So imagine an oil tycoon who's on the top 1,000, right? How did they make their money? By pumping a bunch of oil out of the ground. Right?
That's a profound point, Jamin.
Yeah, so it's basically
it can be measured. It can be roughly measured. And,
exactly.
and it can give the common woman and man a new sense of self importance, not in the negative sense of the term, but wait a minute, I thought I was so insignificant, right? Because I had I was worth so little. My net worth was essentially like less than zero.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm in debt or whatever. But look at how little damage I'm doing, relatively speaking, to all of these, important people.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So and that's the whole point, is that, that net worth really says it all. That's the undergirding philosophy that so much of humanity has latched onto and assimilated and made their own. That, I've got to hoard. And that's the imperative. And it's equated with survival. It's equated with sex appeal. It's equated with longevity. It's equated with enjoyment of life. It's equated with admiration of others.
All these primal drives that aren't going away, nor need they. Right? We're not preaching some new gospel of renunciation to try to curb human nature or to deny it or to change it. Right. If nothing else, we're actually trying to work with it, enhance it, and actually, tap the best that is in us, which I believe has to do with human intelligence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And use that as the basis for prosperity.
Yeah.
So we're not preaching a gospel of, well, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be that, but that it should be done in a different way, right? Within a larger context, within a worldwide.
Well, right. Well, so consider this, Michael, and everyone, is that Adam Smith's invisible hand, the guiding force of that invisible hand was this imperative to hoard, right? And to hoard specifically this intangible stuff called money, which, however you get it, it's how much you have that matters, right? So very little regard for the impacts we have on Mother Earth or on each other in pursuit of that. And money, I can attest from personal experience, can be very addictive. You can get addicted to the process of accumulating more and more and more. And, I think the richest people are the greatest addicts. They're notorious for working insane hours to accumulate more and more and more wealth when they're already, their net worth is in the billions or tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So, it's like it is a disease. And so back to the van analogy. So in addition to all these people pointing their fingers at each other, fighting each other, in some cases physically, in some cases killing each other, there are also, one thing that really characterizes everyone is so separate from everyone else, right? Like, for example, in families that, were once very close-knit, if certain members of the family become very, very wealthy and other members are very, very poor, they tend not to talk to each other, right? And I've seen this in my own family. People who used to be very, very close are no longer close at all. And all kinds of jealousy sets in, and all this fear. The people who've got lots and lots of money, don't want the others coming around with an empty hat saying, hey, give me some, right? So it really separates people. And so there's this tremendous separation. So the invisible hand, in addition to guiding the economy in a certain direction, is also spreading people apart. It's pushing people apart, right?
Absolutely. It's isolating.
It's isolating people. And it's getting so many people focused on just hoarding, and it becomes a mania, right?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of flying first class, which unfortunately for me, I've never done. Right, where you're quite literally separated, with by a way of a curtain, from everybody else who's flying coach. And then even up front, where you're separated from, the ground lanes, you have, these, maybe you have your own, like, love sofa or seat or something that reclines, and you're not even really in contact with the people around you in first class either.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up the first class analogy, metaphor, whatever. But please check it out. It's actually not true that people are so separated. There's a crucial moment. There are crucial moments when the people are not separated, but actually brought into intimate contact. And that's when they humiliatingly parade the underclass passengers through first class. And that's where the second class citizens are paraded through.
Yeah.
Right.
And the first class people are seated first. So they're already sitting there before the others get paraded through, so that everybody can see the fact that you're sitting in first class or that you're not sitting in first class.
Exactly. It's utterly humiliating for the second class citizens. Right. And, and the first class citizens are being admired for being first class citizens. And
there they are, lounging in luxury.
Waiting for this filthy, unwashed riffraff to this livestock practically, to shuffle on through. I mean, obviously, a much more humane way to do it would be to seat the second class people first.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then the first class people. And the argument is, look, you're going to spend less time on the plane if you're in first class.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of excuse to do that. They could easily, serve them drinks in their special waiting area or wherever the heck if they need that.
Yeah.
But, I'm just saying it'd be so much more humane. Right. And I think it'd be.
Yeah. But they don't do that precisely.
They don't do that.
Because it creates a sense, a lack in those who aren't flying first class, because there they are, as subject to the other's gaze, right? As they, and the power relationship in that split second, is laid bare,
totally.
Right? As as they pretend not to notice one another.
Exactly. It's utterly humiliating and embarrassing, and I think uncomfortable for both sides. But anyway, love that we got off on that, and I want to get back to the hand thing, because the question that's going to make all the difference for humanity and possibly for Mother Earth, not all the difference, but some difference potentially for Mother Earth as well, but certainly for humanity, is if we can somehow replace the Adam Smith invisible hand, leading us towards, such horrific outcomes as first class and second class citizens flying together and being paraded in front of one another. Replace that hand or transform the hand. Let's talk about replacing it, because it's such a filthy hand. Replacing it with a hand which draws people together, rather than separating them apart and making them feel terrible, right?
Yeah, and it's not invisible.
It's
visible. It's kind of like a joint. It's kind of like a visible joining of hands.
There we go. I love it. A visible joining of hands. Everyone's hand participates.
It's transparent.
Yep.
People know what's at stake. What are people willing to sacrifice? What are they going to receive in return? Right? It's not veiled. Right? The system, as it's set up now, it's all very veiled in a way where it's kind of like you're not really supposed to know, you know, what's actually it's like nobody really knows what's going on, and so you have to do what you can to survive, because you never know what the outcome is going to be if you don't, you know, do, you know, A, B, C, X, Y, Z. In this case, you know exactly what the consequences are, and frankly, they're catastrophic.
Yeah. Yeah.
If people do not join hands, this is what will happen to you.
Right.
Instead of you making it out alive, right? You surviving with your family in some bunker, right, in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of that outcome where you emerge as, like, you know, one of the sole survivors and get to repopulate the earth with your offspring, you know, some, you know, fantasy, the outcome is going to be just, you know, devastation and destruction, to the point that you're going to live on a planet that's going to be, you know, void of the beauty that we see now, right? The health and the wealth that we know.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that, you know, it's interesting to talk to at least two different types of people about scenarios, end of the world scenarios, or or, you know, catastrophic scenarios. Some people tend to think that when that happens, people resort to, you know, violence, right? Get your gun, you got to protect yourself because people are going to come after your food storage or whatever it is, right? There's a certain mentality, but then there's other people who have actually been a part of these kinds of disasters, these catastrophes. For them, it isn't just a fantasy, right? It's a reality. They've lived it. And almost universally, they say it's in those moments when people pull together the most.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, it's interesting that you should bring that up, because when you contemplate the moment when essentially modern industrial civilization, you know, when the industrial part of it and the transportation network parts of it and whatnot, when those essentially collapse, right? And you no longer have coal burning power plants spewing out coal, and you basically just have humanity, what's left of it at that point, with whatever tools, assets, their bare hands, you know, whatever, you know, I'm not suggesting there will be no more vehicles or no more tractors or anything. I'm just saying there'll be a lot less production and refining of oil. And what you'll be left with is basically what's stored in giant tanks. And so, you know, armed groups, whether military, militia, rebels. Mad Max. So we'll when we get to Mad Max, here's the startling thing about that. When we get to that Mad Max state, which could happen fairly quickly, especially with the invisible hand doing what it's doing today. When we get to Mad Max, are you familiar with global dimming? The concept of global dimming?
Tell what is global dimming?
Okay, it is really crucial, and I just saw a great documentary on it, and I'll post the link here. Global dimming is so this massive industrial economy that we've built up that's spewing out so many hydrocarbons and so much smoke and exhaust and contaminants and all that. That stuff goes into the atmosphere. And some of that, like sulfate particles from coal burning power plants, are actually reflective themselves. Okay. So we're essentially doing a form of geoshading. But even what I just articulated about reflective particles, that is a drop in the bucket compared to, not a drop in the bucket, but it's a small fraction compared to the major global dimming effect, which is that all these particles get up there in the atmosphere. They seed clouds. In other words, they cause gazillions of micro droplets of water to condense around these nuclei of airborne particulates.
Oh,
right? Not gases, but particles. So it causes water
clouding effect. Yeah.
It creates a clouding effect, and those clouds act as huge mirrors,
Sure.
reflecting away sunlight. 100% of the sunlight, like a mirror, no, but a significant percentage of it gets reflected, right?
Yeah, the top of clouds are white.
Exactly, but the implications are absolutely startling. I'll just sum it up as follows. When industrial civilization collapses and we go Mad Max and we're not belching out all these particulates, the particulates that are up in the air will fall down, right? The heavier ones will collapse in a matter of hours. They're falling down already. It's kind of like a juggler, right? Who's like the worst juggler in the world, but he can throw a whole bunch of balls in the air. So he keeps grabbing balls from this giant plastic Rubbermaid garbage can full of tennis balls. And he keeps just throwing them up in the air. So at any given moment, there may be 20 balls in the air. It's just that every ball that he throws up falls down eventually. So it's like a juggler doing that, keeping a bunch of particulates in the air. But the moment this guy, stops juggling, stops throwing up more balls, the rest just fall down. Some take longer than others, but they all fall down. Ashes, all fall down. Check this out. When that happens, they've done the math, and the estimate is that when that happens, that global dimming effect collapses, there will be, within weeks, a spike of average global temperature of 3 degrees centigrade.
Whoa.
An increase, a jump, a sudden jump, right?
It's kind of the sudden. It's like the dimmer. The dimmer has been you've basically been decreasing it or increasing or whatever, right? But then all of a sudden, you just kind of the dimming goes away all at once.
Exactly. We've been dimming the sun, so we're getting a lot less sun, right?
And then you just flip the switch.
And then you flip the switch and bam, and then suddenly you get a sunburn, right? The jump in 3 degrees C is the nastiest sunburn you can imagine, because we're already at about 1 degree C above pre-industrial baseline. They keep moving the baseline, catch-22 style, so that they artificially, the UN data is under it, but that's just so they move the baseline, the cowards, rather than just stick with a common baseline. We're about 1 degree C above the baseline, and that was the point that James Hansen said, do not cross 1 degree C. We've already done it. And, others say, 2 degrees C, whatever. Let's be conservative and say 2 degrees C is that point of no return, just for the sake of argument. We're already at 1. With the loss of global dimming, we go to +4. We go from +1 to +4.
Because it's a 3 degree jump from where we are now.
Exactly. We're at 1 right now. Add 3 to 1 and you get 4. Boom. We'd be at +4 degrees C, whereas all scientists universally say do not cross 2 degrees C above baseline. We'd be at 4 degrees C above baseline immediately, right? And then it's really a vicious death spiral from there that just in a matter of a few years will take us to +10 degrees C above baseline when you throw in all the methane, all the forest fires.
Right. And then it's like have fun when you emerge from your bunker, right, in the Rocky Mountains.
There's going to be nothing to emerge to. And what's even worse is the 440-odd nuclear power plants that are currently in operation will have gone Fukushima, will have gone Chernobyl.
Yeah.
And so much ionizing radiation will be frying the atmosphere that it will destroy the atmosphere, and we'll essentially have a lifeless planet, not entirely unlike Mars, which has no atmosphere.
which used to.
Yeah. And so, so there will be nothing but death. A hot radioactive lifeless atmosphere-free planet will be what you will have to emerge to from your bunker. Right? That's the future that we have for ourselves. And so what's happening is, so back to the van metaphor, the people who are jumping out of the windows of the van end up going over the edge of the cliff too. Or just instead, they're flying over the edge of the cliff, Thelma and Louise style, but just freestyle as a person without a parachute, right? And then of course everybody else in the van, but we're all going down to the valley floor, the floor of the Grand Canyon, where we'll meet certain death. Okay, that's what awaits us all. So, by metaphor, so going back to the invisible hand, or multiple hands or joining hands or whatever we'll call it. Let's just call it replacing one hand with another. This new hand or hands, what will it do? It will direct humanity to come together. Rather than separate from each other, to come together. Rather than compete with each other, come together. Well, what does this coming together look like? We don't know. That's what we're grappling with here. That's kind of the ultimate point of this conversation, is what will it take for us to orchestrate the existence, the replacement of the current invisible hand with a new visible hand? What will it take, right? And my hunch is it'll take a combination of communicating the reality of what we see through the windshield, that which we just articulated, in many other important aspects. See Guy McPherson. That's the best way to get up to speed on all that.
Yeah, and dispelling the myth of the sole survivor. Yep. Right, where if I just hoard enough and whatever, that at least I'll get out. I'll make it out alive.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to dispel that myth, and then also present some, however blurry, however imprecise, however vague, however impressionistic, however whatever, some vision of what could be an alternative to all of us, for sure, going over the edge of the cliff. So let me just say, for example, one possible alternative is that a certain group of people manage to open up the back door, jump out of that, and do a MacGyver-style roll to a dusty stop and survive. So some portion of humanity is surviving. To what end, right? Well, that could be part of the vision as well. Like, some portion of humanity needs to survive so that they can, with the help of a bunch of weather-resistant robots, shut down all the nuclear power plants, right? Why is that important? So that we don't fry the atmosphere and turn the planet into something completely lifeless, right? You see, if we manage to shut down the power plants, even in the face of a 10-degree C jump in global average temperature from pre-industrial baseline, even if we go that hot, we go hothouse, where we as a planet, long before humanity was here, we as a planet spent the vast majority of our existence in a hothouse state rather than the, just above ice age state, cold state that we've been in the last several thousand years. That's an artificial low, very unstable one, it turns out. Well, we're kicking ourselves out of this very unstable state into the much more stable hothouse state. Now, has life existed in hothouse states? Yes, of course. Certain species survive, notably bacteria and some lucky insects and, earth dwellers and whatnot. And my suspicion is some forms of complex life will continue to exist.
Yeah, maybe some sea creatures.
Thank you. Exactly. And so if those are the survivors, I don't think humanity would survive. I happen to agree with Professor Guy McPherson on that. But, I even challenge myself on that, in asking, could we build some arcologies, some, semi-weather resistant arcologies, right? With shading, with a tough enough, advanced material shell, right? And, that can reflect away most of the heat, but let in enough sunlight here, there, and wherever for the greenhouses to grow. And also, why not, stockpile a bunch of grain in those very weather-resistant arcologies to at least buy that civilization some time, to develop the technologies required for growing more food.
I think what we're talking about here is like the lifeboat, right? The raft or whatever. And I do think it's important to talk about, just as it's important for, every vessel to have, any number of lifeboats. But at the same time, the 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 substance of the conversation, or we need to focus on the boat itself, right? Keeping the boat afloat, while at the same time not neglecting the lifeboat, because let's face it, that's what they're there for.
Sorry, I had to voice dictate something.
Yeah.
But I heard what you were saying. I just muted myself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's it. It's a lifeboat, but it's a lifeboat. Let's call it an ark, because the parallels with Noah's Ark are going to be profound, literally profound. Because it's not just an ark to save humanity; it's an ark to save life. Life, period. Not just complex life. Life. Because again, if we let the 440 odd nuclear power plants go Fukushima all at once, essentially, we fry the atmosphere, or we run a serious risk of that. In any case, the effects of those nuclear power plants, not to mention the nuclear missiles, is not going to be good. That's the bottom line, right? So we need the arc of humanity, not only to save humanity, but also to save life, period, or much more of life than would otherwise be saved if we did not develop this arc. An arc with a plan, an arc with a vision, an arc with a new invisible hand, guiding those humans to do the right things rather than the wrong things that we've been doing for the last, several hundred years.
Save. Once we have reached the point that we're talking about saving life itself, right? I think it just shows how dire, how mired we are in this, what a grip the invisible hand has had on not only human life, right, but life itself. Because the economy and the ecology, to come full circle, are inevitably intertwined in such a way that you're not going to be able to do anything meaningful in the one domain without doing something in the other. And it could be, as Guy McPherson, talks about, how essentially the economy is this big, machine, this, just belching out, pollutants, which is basically what it does. It's a big machine, and inevitably there's exhaust coming out of the tailpipe. That, however it happens, whether through human volition, right, or not, there's going to be a point at which it's no longer going to be viable for that economic system to continue. Perhaps it's because a significant number of humanity perishes, right? It could there's a number of scenarios that we could imagine. But I think it isn't so important that we know in advance how it's going to happen, exactly what's going to happen. Is that we're trying to prevent the loss of life, period, right, on every front. I mean, let's face it, the rate of extinction, as far as I'm aware, it's as high as ever, except during these, critical extinction events, caused by such things as, maybe a meteor or something crashing through the atmosphere. I mean, it's that kind of situation. It's only that for the first time in human history, it's actually coming from within the system itself, caused by species.
Totally, absolutely. No, very well said. And I think so. What's occurred to me is that the thing that can get us to change hands from Adam Smith's invisible hand to the new visible, let's just call it the hand of compassion, right? So what's gonna orchestrate that transition of power, of transition of hands, right? It is a shift in power. It's a massive shift in power, actually, from the ultra wealthy sociopaths who currently run the world and are running it into this mass extinction um, of humanity and most, if not all, other complex life. Literally, all other complex life could go if we lose the atmosphere. I don't even know if the bacteria would survive in an atmosphere-free, in an oxygen-free planet. Right? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absurd, but that's where we're headed. So, what can actually cause us to achieve this change in hand? Would be the idea virus. Check this out. The idea virus that a number of us are building an ark. A number of us are building an ark, and we're prying open the back door of the van, and we're going to jump out with the ark on a mission to, among other things, A, shut down the nuclear power plants, and B, survive within the ark, right? The ark would be short for Arcology, right? Yeah, Arcology. So the ark, the new ark, is an Arcology. It'll be a weather-resistant Arcology with greenhouses, stockpiled grain, and you better believe guns and ammo, because there's going to be plenty of people outside the ark wanting in. And so let's devise this ark, and only those within either that ark or, of course, there will be some people surviving in bunkers underground who will, but they'll only get the signal that it's safe to come out once we've shut down the nuclear power plants, right? Now, if they want to participate in the shutting down the nuclear power plants, great. So there's going to be this major arc, right, that's going to have this mission of shutting down the nuclear power plants. That's going to make the world safe for all the other arcs that end up, being created, whether underground or, rather than above ground, there's in between, and I think most successful arcologies will be in between, because they'll have substantial underground for cooling, for safety, for access to water. Some of them will be located above the most persistent aquifers, providing sources of fresh water, right? For example, others will be co-located in addition with geothermal for access to certain energy sources. But I think solar is going to be the main one, and thank goodness we're sophisticated enough with solar. But the bottom line is this: we need surviving arcologies with the mission of shutting down the nuclear power plants and safely disposing or storing, to the extent possible, the materials. These are major projects government should be investing in right now. And I don't care what the system is that figures out who gets to go into the arcologies. It could just be a random lottery, right? I don't think, billionaires should be given any kind of preferential treatment. If anything, it should be the opposite, since the billionaires are the ones who have a vastly disproportionate burden of having gotten us into this mess, right?
Yeah.
By taking hoarding to such extremes, to such earth-destroying extremes, right? It's the hoarding of wealth that has caused poverty, and it's poverty that has driven us to such degrees of overpopulation, which is, many would say, the ultimate culprit. But anyway, I'm going on mute here, so you can
okay. Well, I'm going to take a quick break. Feel free to monologue or to take a break yourself. I'll be back in 3 minutes.
Well, actually, I'll tell you what. I'll do you one better. Let's just both mute our cameras and our microphones, because I actually need to make a phone call, which shouldn't go for more than 10 minutes or so. So let me do that, and then. But anyway, I'll just see you in around 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
But let's turn off our cameras in the meantime so that people know that we're on pause, and then we'll get back to this. Okay, thanks.
Okay, see you back in 10.
Thanks.
just to let you know, I'm back, been back, but maybe maybe some call or doing something else. So I'm on standby. A short time more. A short time more. Okay, no problem.
Okay, I'm back. And thanks everybody for your patience. Now I'm like looking in the mirror. um, all right,
And back
thanks
back
so
as
much for
well.
hanging in there,
Yep.
Michael. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So how much more time do you got?
All the time in the world.
Oh. Okay.
So let's just round out, because you know what? I think we've got the idea virus that's going to do the change in hands, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
it's because what a powerful meme. It's like we're going down, but there's an arc, or maybe there's multiple arcs. I think we're going to need multiple arcs. We should be co-locating arcs right near nuclear power plants and actually build tunnels. Build a tunnel from the arc, right? Let's call it Homer's arc. Let's call it Homer's arc, right? Because Homer knows how to shut down the nuclear power plant, and it's going to take somebody as crazy as Homer to actually pull it off, right?
Right. Homer Simpson versus George Burns. Is that who it was?
Yeah. I don't know who it was, but anyway.
I think George Burns. I think he runs the power plant. Maybe he owns it. Anyway.
There you go. Yeah. It's going to be Homer versus George. That's right. And so we're going to call it Homer's arc, and Homer and family and friends. That whole friendly cast of characters will be living in the arc, and they'll have a tunnel to the power plant, and and it could be that we do this in a clandestine way, because you can imagine the bad guys would want to take over the arcs, right? So imagine,
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, go ahead.
well, in fact, look, who needs tunnels? Right? Who needs tunnels? Let's have each arc be equipped with a small fleet or a large fleet of weather-resistant vehicles and plenty of stockpiled fuel and lubricants and spare parts. That even if it's a freaking hurricane, well, let's wait till the hurricane passes, right? But whether that hurricane leaves a bunch of mud in its wake, or if it desertifies because it's a hothouse state, whatever happens, these all-terrain, weather-resistant vehicles will be able to drive from the Arcology to the nuclear power plant, do what they need to do, right? but take over the plant. Look, there won't be anyone to take it over from other than Mother Nature.
At
right?
that time, yeah.
And mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, exactly, because all the humans will be dead, right? I mean, you know, what human being is going to want to bunker down in a nuclear power plant when we go to hothouse state, right? People are going to run away from those things. But a few brave souls in Arcologies co-located with the nuclear power plants and in communication with each other, right? So heaven forbid, you know, one Arcology should go down and go dark, right? Either because of extreme weather or, you know, one of the big armies of the world blew it up thinking it was, you know, an enemy camp or something like that, whatever. But if for whatever reason it goes down, the other Arcologies will know about it. And some of these Arcologies will be equipped with aircraft, right? Again, with stockpiled fuel, lubricants, and spare parts to be able to fly like a big cargo plane and, you know, build out, you know, a makeshift Arcology, right?
They're like different, they're fleets of Arks, right? And we could even start those now, right? And give them numbers or code names or, you know, whatever, which is essentially what we're doing, but we can make it more explicit, right? It's kind of like we're having these conversations, you know, different fleets maybe focused on different things. Right now we're talking about nuclear power plants. That, of course, you know, nuclear is one of the, you know, existential threats along with global climate change. And so it's fitting that we're talking about that, and that one in conjunction with the other, going to a hothouse day when there's a limited number of humans left, but there's still any number of nuclear power plants live, whether online or not. It's kind of like you've triaged in advance the emergency that is getting ready to happen, right? So we're getting ready for it to happen, and I think one of the ways in which to do that is to form these fleets by whatever names, you know, whether we call it you know, a fleet or not, but essentially that's what we're doing in taking on any number of the world's problems, whether it's that's one of them.
Yeah, exactly. But let's call them Homer's Arks, right? Homer's Arks. Each one is a Homer's Ark, right? And because I mean, the basic idea is simply that it takes humans to fix certain problems that Mother Earth can't necessarily fix for herself.
Well, it certainly takes humans to cause certain problems.
No question about that. I'm also saying, without questioning that for one microsecond, it takes humans to solve certain problems that Mother Earth cannot solve for herself, such as, for example, the problem of the 440-odd nuclear power plants. We need Homer's Arks, 440 of them, 450 of them to round up, in order to shut those down. And we also need Arks to take care of the nuclear missiles, right?
Yeah, and the fact that more are being built, I don't know at what rate, but they're increasing, not decreasing.
Now here's a really exciting question. It's kind of binary, right? Kind of binary. Is that as we go about building this network of Arks to, you know, cover planet Earth, with a heavy concentration in the northern hemisphere, that's where most of the nuclear power plants are. But we're going to cover the Earth with these Arks, and not just to address nuclear power plants and nuclear missiles. I'm sure there's a whole laundry list of, you know, reasons we can come up with for some of us, even if it's 1% of us or 0.1% of us, or even 1,000% in numbers, right? Some number of us to stick around at least long enough to solve those crucial problems, that are solvable. Shutting down nuclear power plants is a solvable problem. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is solvable. And I've heard some estimates that it takes actually decades to really decommission and stop and safely shut down a nuclear power plant. That blows my mind. How could it possibly take that long? I have high hopes that radical collective intelligence will be able to come up with the ways, means, and technologies, including integrating existing ways, means, and technologies, to be able to shut them down a lot faster. But the real trick is we're going to have to figure that out as we build these arcologies, Arks, in order to anyway. But I'm rat holing. I don't mean to rat hole. Bottom line, we have a unique window of opportunity right now where we have a functioning industrial economy, and we haven't blasted through yet to this hyper acceleration of temperature, right? You know, we haven't gone Mad Max yet, and we haven't melted the Arctic ice yet. God knows we keep trying, and in fact, there's, I'd say, a very strong probability, on the order of 50%, that we have an ice-free Arctic this summer of 2018. When we have that, oh my goodness, all bets are off, and I think we start really making a fast drive towards global dimming, the +3, and once we hit that +3 mark, then we're just
toast.
I mean, we're gone at that point, just totally gone. So we've got a limited window of time, possibly as short as 12 months or less, to build out hundreds of arcologies around the world, right? So one big bifurcating question, remember I said there's a bifurcating question, is do we do this quietly or do we do it publicly? Right? Do we do it quietly or do we do it publicly?
I don't know why, but to me it seems that doing it publicly is the way to go, because it just because we're publicly organizing these, Homer's Arks,
yeah,
right? It doesn't mean that everything that happens within them, or even that most of what happens in them, is made public.
Yeah,
maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know, but the very fact that there's a need for them, I think, is important to be made known, because it's kind of like, well, what's that and why, right? Keeping them secret, I think, also is sort of, it's kind of like by hiding the solution, you're hiding the problem.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, no, and also consistent with the meme, the idea virus that we're launching with this video. As soon as we make this public, the idea virus is launched. We've got enough of an audience that it'll at least penetrate a few hundred minds, but it only takes one of those to write a compelling blog post about this, and then
yeah. And Homer was a far cry from silent when he was closing down the Springfield nuclear power plant.
Totally.
Or take Noah, in the Bible, who was, proverbially screaming it from the rooftop, saying, "Hey, repent, there's going to be a flood," or whatever, and then everybody laughed at him, and then the water descended or ascended, or whatever they did.
Yeah.
So I think, but again, like you said, it's a small percentage of people relative to even those who are actively solving the world's problems, who are going to be a part of these for whatever reason, because they want to be, because their skill set is needed. So I think it's one of those things where we create a space for that as a part of the platforms that we're already creating, and let people populate that part of the platform who feel called for to do so that you'll have Doctors in Utopia, right, Michael Gosney, people like that, who are really spearheading Homer's Arks. Others who are not only interested in that, have the aptitude for it, but for whatever reason find themselves. I just think there's going to be any number of people who are going to be drawn to that. Let that process play out organically. And because it's a part of a larger network, you know, a larger, a platform that it's in and of itself is a network of networks. People will migrate from other parts to that, to being a part of these arcs, right? Or maybe their skill sets will be borrowed and they'll work, you know, other people will like, you know, want to jump on board and like take command of a fleet or whatever, right? I'm just saying, let it happen by not closing up and keeping it contained. I think open it up. So you know, and as the level of urgency, right? The sense of urgency. Let's say there's an ice free Arctic, right? One summer, which is just going to make headlines, you know, all over the world, right? As that happens, and the sense of urgency increases, so will the interest in and therefore the perceived importance of that of Homer's arcs.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, no, you've made such a compelling case. I'm totally sold.
So I think it's just a part. I think it's just an organic part of the platform, but one that we have, you know, sort of the foresight to co-create in advance.
Well, exactly. And we is, of course, all of humanity, because the big advantage of making it a totally public project is that we give the gift of invitation to the world. We give the world the gift of the opportunity to contribute to the Arcology. In fact, let's call the whole thing the Arcology, right? The entire thing, the set of all the arcs would be the Arcology.
Yeah. Of which closing down, you know, powering down the nuclear power plants is a central part, but not the only. Right? It's kind of like there's any number of mission impossibles that they're undertaking, and that just happens, you know, so happens to be like, you know, one of the climatic moments in the movie where they power down the nuclear power plants.
Wow, I love it. I love it. Yeah, and you know, you can imagine, you know, on the dashboard on the website that tracks all this, right? At first, you're gonna see, you know, let's call it 450. You see 450 red lights, and then over time, you'll see some of the reds go to yellows, which means we've got it under control. We haven't shut it down yet, but it's on track. Then red goes to yellow, and when it's finally shut down, green.
I really like that.
And
it's like a heat map.
Yes.
Of the hazard of the level of, you know, danger.
Exactly. And, you know, and nuclear power plants that, heaven forbid, though it's been known to happen, go Fukushima, then, you know, or are at risk of going Fukushima, you know, the grand Arcology, the grand arc of all the Homer's arcs all around the world, will be able to concentrate available resources, or free up resources, deprioritize even in-flight projects in order, you know, or just shift the prioritization, and we'll really start to operate like an ant colony at that point, right? So one form of Arcology is like an antology, where, you know, we learn, and this is where a lot of academics who study ant colonies and study the information exchange, the intelligence, the collective intelligence, you know, that which is built-in biological knowledge versus that which is learned, et cetera, et cetera. We've got a lot to learn from the ants, because we're going to have to do a whole bunch of stuff subterraneously. We're going to have to divide and conquer, and we're going to have to be selfless as opposed to self-centered. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, there's some ants that are going to be sent out on suicide missions. You know, the soldier ants, they're the ones who come out when people start stomping on the ant colony, for crying out loud. So, you know, anyway, I don't want to go too far on that metaphor. Yeah. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think people are gonna, you know, we were talking about human nature before, like we're in a way like out to deny it, right, or even to change it for that matter, but to enhance it, to build upon all the good that is there. Um, and I think that desire to be a part, and to experience oneself as a part of a greater whole, right, a synergistic part of a greater whole, uh, is primal, is universal, um, and is lacking in, especially in modern society. And so to be a part of one of these cells, one of these arcs, whatever, you know, just that, you know, so that it's more than just like a conversation group, right? I mean, you could have cells or arcs or whatever, guilds, whatever, around um, different topics or on different topics, which are problems to be solved. And so that people aren't just a part of a conversation, as essential as that is to what we're doing. And not all the people who are part of the conversation would you know would want to up the ante, right? The level of commitment to become a part of one of these arcs or cells or whatever, right? But certain ones would, and I think that there should be a way for them to satisfy that desire without looking elsewhere. That need to belong and to have more than a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And to create these kinds of to create the possibility for these groups to form organically, but in a way where we've sort of prepared the ground, you know, for that kind of growth, so that people are having conversations on certain topics. But in addition to that, certain people among those are going to want to actually form these groups that are more uh, they're activists, right? It's like from conversation to activity, and it's a whole spectrum, right? Some people are not listening. Some people are listening but not talking. Some people are talking and listening. Some people are, you know, talking, listening, and acting, taking action more than just an intellectual exercise. And that fulfills a very basic, you know, uh, uh, human need. You know, on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, belonging comes just after basic survival.
Yeah, and we're really at a point of survival right now.
So it's really so basic. And the fact, and I think one of the signs that you know, but before we've gotten to the point where basic survival is called into question, which it now is for the first time, I think, at least consciously, you know, that we're cognizant of it, over the last, you know, I don't know, since the 60s or whenever. I think before that, though, there was already a breakdown in social solidarity, right? Well, I think the sense of belonging began to be studied in detail hundreds of years before the whole notion of like life itself, you know, being threatened with extinction. Already, there was already a breakdown, right? This isolation that we keep talking about. The silver lining in all of this is that this gives people a purpose to come back together again in a meaningful way.
Bingo. Bingo, because here's the crucial difference between what we're talking about with Homer's art and what all these, you know, I'll just say 10 millionaires plus, right? You need to basically be a 10 millionaire plus in order to build a really badass bunker, right? Where you and your family are set to survive for, you know, several decades into the future. So the difference between the bunkers and what we're doing is the differences are just are they're actually really profound, the differences. In fact, I can hardly think of a similarity other than survival between the two, because whereas the sociopaths who are building the bunkers are doing it for very selfish reasons, and they are the ones with the most blood on their hands for having brought in humanity did it as humanity, but they've got a disproportionately large share of the guilt. Is that the Homer's arcs are there for a really profound purpose, to save life, right? Whereas the sociopaths are all about destroying life in order to hoard more and more wealth for themselves. And I think that as this story gets out, as this story breaks, because it's a story of survival, and that's a pretty compelling story, always has been. Think of the book Alive by Morgan. I think it was John Pierpont Morgan, if I recall correctly. Anyway, the Englishman who wrote that amazing book Alive, chronicling the true story of the heroic Uruguayans who survived in the Andes. In fact, I'd love to speak with those survivors and get their input, because we're going to need that kind of talent, right? In other words, imagine those Uruguayan heroes joining the radical collective intelligence, as well as the heroes who died on the mountain, right? Because their stories and their memory and their participation, some of those who died on the mountain, pretty much all the folks who died on the mountain who didn't die in the immediate crash, made key contributions to the survival of the whole. And that's part of our lesson is, look, not all of us are going to survive. We'll have to do the math and figure out how many of these Arcologies we can build and all that. But certainly not all of us are going to survive. And it is a bit of a mission impossible. I'd call it.
And what do you want your legacy to be? Right. And because we're not going to survive anyway, as at least as mere mortals, right? It's built in the definition of being mortal, the fact that we're going to die. Whatever happens or doesn't happen after, the legacy that lives on, are you going to be a part of that or not? The legacy of survival, the legacy of self-transcendence, right? And so, yeah, I think the fact that there were certain people who sacrificed, who ended up dying, but in the quest for survival, and not only for themselves, but for the, for the whole, like with Alive, with the Uruguayans, in another generation, they're all going to be dead, right? And so history is not going to look back and think that much differently about those who ended up dying in the fight to survive or thereafter, right? I mean, the fact is that if they didn't pull together, none of them would have survived there. And therefore they wouldn't have, as a group, gone on to live such a heroic legacy and had children and and whatever else they ended up doing in their presumably very productive lives thereafter, those who did survive. But those who died played an important part, as I'm sure each and every one of those survivors would tell you. Those who didn't make it, but anyway, we're talking about some pretty serious stuff here. I think it would be worthwhile, since we've wanted to talk to and interview the guy McPhersons of the world, people with a lot of knowledge, experience. Also talk to those people who have experienced firsthand what it's like to be a survivor, because I'm sure it just shakes you out of your complacency. What you take to be kind of this comfortable existence, which you find out in a split second is anything but that, because the ground could shift, beneath your feet at any moment. And that's, I think, a metaphor for where humanity's at as a whole. And to not let that complacency, keep you from keep us from action, right?
Totally.
And I think the survivor's perspective is, they've been through, they made it through something that most of us haven't.
Totally. And in addition to survivors of unplanned tragedies, right?
Yeah.
For example, the crash in the Andes was an unplanned tragedy. In addition to that, and that's a whole class of survivorship and survivor skills that we urgently need to get into the radical collective intelligence. And when we launch howtochangetheworld.org, that'll be one place to store that knowledge. But in the meantime, I ask all survivors who have something to contribute to this conversation, get your thoughts on the record. And the easiest way to do that is to record a hangout, just like what we're doing right now, right? So please, get your insights, your wisdom, because a lot of these survivors have had now decades in which to contemplate what worked and what didn't work, right? And in addition to the survivors of such unplanned tragedies, now consider the survivors of exoduses, of exodi, if that's the plural of exodus, right? And so, for example, consider the Mormons, who were led by the likes of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, et cetera, who led the way to building a whole new civilization in the desert, right? Not a bad metaphor, frankly, for what is about to come, because a lot of these arcologies will end up being in the desert. The difference between what the Mormon pioneers did and what the survivors of the Andes crash did, the key difference is the Mormon pioneers had the opportunity to plan. The survivors of the Andes did not. So it's two very different sets of skill sets that needed to emerge in one scenario versus the other. I'm going to go on mute because I imagine you might have some stuff to say about, these and even other forms. And in the meantime, I'm going to mute my camera, but just for a minute. I'm still listening, but I'm right here. It's just I'm going to mute my camera for a minute. But you go ahead.
Yeah, I think in the case of the Mormons, one of the reasons why they had so much foresight to plan ahead wasn't so much because of prophecy, as I imagine many Mormons would tell you, because they could, see into the future, but because they had actually been through hardships before, and had even had the survival of their movement threatened several times, and so by the time they did migrate to the desert basin in the West, they had already been through a few close calls. They had been in survival mode at least 2 or 3 times before that, and so they had some practice, right? That's what we need, right? We need if we live too comfortably, too far away from our basic connection to Mother Earth, for example, which of course is right there. When the time comes, we will have done very little to prepare. And I think just by being mindful of what could happen, right? Thinking through the various scenarios, talking to people who have been through disasters, who have survived, whatever it is, cancer, it doesn't matter. I think this is not only bringing us together, but it's also bringing us back home, so to speak, to Mother Earth, because what we're talking about is so basic, right? It's interesting that we're kind of coming back to our origins, emerging from the from the primal soup, the primordial ocean, we're at that point now where we're kind of confronting a situation, or we're trying to fend off that having to happen again in order for there to be intelligent life on Earth. It's like here we are. What more do we need? I would argue that if anything, we need less of what we have. Anyway, because it's just getting in the way, I think, of living. Because of we had talked previously about 50 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Kind of pushing up against that, I think.
Oh sure.
And I'm going to get rolling pretty soon here, because, as you know, I'm gonna drive back to the part of northern Thailand where I've been living today.
Cool, awesome. Well, I'll tell you what. You go when you need to go. I'll keep rolling, because law number one of the 22 immutable laws of marketing: it's better to be first than it is to be better. It applies here. This is the first in a series called Homer's Ark. Why don't we just call it Homer's Ark? Right. Anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like think about the big hit that Survivor's been on television. Not that I watch television, but
totally. And this is about the survival of both our species, and a much bigger game of survival, which is the survival of complex life, and then an even bigger game of survival, which is the survival of life, period. Right? So we got 3 stages of survival: humanity, complex life, and life, period.
Yeah.
And for all we know, we're the only instantiation of life in the universe. So if we extinguish life here, we may extinguish it, period. That's part of the, the threat. And when we don't know the odds of that, because we really don't know the odds. Look, as Professor Alvin Drake at MIT, legendary professor of probability and statistics and decision theory and whatnot. I had the good fortune of taking a graduate class with him when I was a grad student at MIT. He said, "Look, the bottom line is this: what's the probability of it raining tomorrow? Right? It's either 100% or it's 0. Either it's going to rain tomorrow or it's not. We're just estimating. So anyway, any probability that we could generate is nothing but
it's a guesstimate.
But the very fact that it's even on the table as a possibility, regardless of what probability, the very fact that it's on the table as a possibility that we could be extinguishing life, not just on planet Earth, but in the entire universe. Wow.
Yeah, what a burden that we're having this conversation.
Right. So look. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And anyway, by the way, I'm just going to keep talking. There's so many things I want to put on the table in episode 1 as opposed to episode 2 that I'm just going to keep rolling.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna get going more or less now.
Yeah, because you can watch the rest of this later anyway, and then if you want to add on an addendum,
the conversation. Well, I will, because we're gonna have any number of these conversations.
Oh, exactly. Anyway, so go when you need to go. If it's now, or whenever it is,
okay.
I want to thank you, Michael, for your freaking awesome contributions. This has been the hangout to not the hangout to end all hangouts.
Yeah,
the hangout
to begin all hangouts.
Possible the continuation of hangouts and all other aspects of life. Here's to life. Cheers. This bud's for you. Here's to life.
Okay, well, I look forward to watching the rest of the recording. I'll see you on the next one.
Awesome. Arigato gozaimasu.
Arigato.
Thank you, Michael. Great work. Great stuff. All right. Thank you, Michael. So let me just brain dump a few things to add, not to take away or change anything that we've discussed, but just to add. One thing I would add is, we talk about there might be a long list or a short list or whatever length list of things that humans will need to do for Mother Earth that Mother Earth won't be able to do for herself, or at least not be able to do very effectively, right? One of those things is actually, this is a super important one. Right up there with the importance of um, shutting down nuclear is the distribution of existing species, the distribution of these organisms from where they currently have habitat to where they will have habitat in a world that's plus 10 degrees C, warmer than today. A very hot, very stormy, um, drought-ridden, desert-ridden um, world. Really not a very fun place to hang out or even visit. Um, Fascinating from a biologist perspective. And here we need to, in a way, sort of, play hand of God, speaking of hands. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. And I apologize if that offends anyone, but it's kind of like using the hand of God to distribute existing species to where they can take root, from where they can take root now to where they can take root. And we're mostly talking about plants, but to the extent that we can save, species of the animal kingdom. And here's where it's a really tough one, because you got this delicate web of life. What comes to mind is, I'll just say the visual. I was about to say totally impractical, but then if I think about using weather-resistant blimps to help out do the job, we might actually be able to pull it off. But imagine you have, like a mini biosphere. Think Biosphere 2 in the American Southwest. You got a mini biosphere, and it's got all this, all the organisms within a certain ecosystem. And you have it as a dome that goes, several meters deep, or however deep it needs to go to contain the relevant life. May not have to be several meters deep. It could be a lot more shallow, depending on the ecosystem. And in fact, you may need only core samples to go even deeper to really get all the organisms. But anyway, you got this hemispheric biosphere, right, that goes a few feet deep or whatever, and you're able to secure the whole thing as a unit and transport it as a unit, whether with blimps or terrestrially or over waterways or whatever, but transport it by whatever means from its existing location to the new location where it can take root successfully. So think, the hottest climates in the world today that thrive there, transporting those ecosystems to the world that's 10 degrees hotter, where their current location may become just a hot, scorching, lifeless desert. Transport it from there, or what's about to become a desert, to the new location at some point in time. And of course, it'll take time itself to make the journey. All that'll have to be planned very carefully so that the timing happens, so that when you plop it down, it's not necessarily in the midst of a freezing Arctic, but it's, and maybe you migrate it over time. I don't know, right? Maybe that's the way to go. But I think things will be happening very quickly. Species won't have time to adapt or evolve. Give me a break. We're talking about many orders of magnitude difference in time scales. We're going to have to make this transplanting of species, and in fact, entire ecosystems, really, to the extent we want to preserve what can be preserved of anything like a web of life. And maybe only a fraction make it. I don't know. Maybe a small fraction make it. I don't know. Maybe the whole thing is a dismal failure. But I think the odds are good that we can pull something like this off. I mean, how exciting is that? We help life go on, right? It may not be a terribly fun place for humans, but at this point, fun is really not the objective. The objective is survival. Survival of what? Like I said, it's sort of like a triage. Survival of life, period, complex life, even better. And, humanity would be like the cherry on top of the cake if humanity can survive. Now, that raises the question, do we want humanity to survive? Up until now, we've proven ourselves quite cancerous. But I would maintain that we've only really become cancerous since either the agricultural revolution or a little bit before that. When I say a little bit before that, it could be thousands of years before that. Because that's when we really started going sociopathic and hoarding and separation and all that. Prior to that, when we were true hunter-gatherers, we were living as communities. The basic organism was not the individual. The basic organism was literally the community, because an individual couldn't survive on their own. They needed the community, right? They needed the community to, store information, pass it on from generation to generation through story, through ritual, many different tasks and skills required for that community to survive and, in fact, thrive. Tool making, hunting, child rearing, the grandmothering of children, so many vital aspects of life that really needed a whole community in order to be viable, not to mention the biological diversity that's required, a minimum viable population size. So humanity, my thesis is that humanity does not have to be cancerous, right? It's civilization and, the growing and storing of mass quantities of grains that has, I think, been the basis for our going sociopathic. So we can imagine, once we've transplanted, if we're going to be transplanting all these other species, let's transplant humanity as well. And those who wish to survive in this new hothouse planet, but really, largely, if not entirely, largely as custodians of life on Earth. So let's go from being those who destroyed life to being a custodian of life on Earth, to being custodians of life on Earth, shepherds of life on Earth. And so that's what's really defining feature of this new type of arcology, as opposed to the bunkers that the sociopaths are building, or mostly at this point mostly have built and are getting ready to move into. Homer's Ark has purpose. It's got mission, real mission, way beyond just the survival of guilty sociopaths, but survival of, again, the triage. Life itself is at stake. So we've got to do what we've got to do. This is a big part of it. And I nominate Michael Gosney and I nominate Doctress Newtopia as, two among many. They'll be the first to acknowledge, oh my goodness, we need this person, this person, this person, to be two of the pioneers of kind of helping put together the kind of the dream advisory board, for lack of better words, because we don't just want to transform government. Actually, we want to get rid of government. We want to transform governance. Government is just one possible manifestation of governance. I think we need, a blockchain, technology empowered, cryptocurrency powered, whole new form of governance of humanity, both for the Arcologies, but also for today, and for the bridge between today, advent and population of Arcologies, and survival of the Arcologies during the transition from unstable cold house state that we're in right now to the hot house state of plus 10 degrees C over pre-industrial baseline, a full 9 degrees C hotter than where we are today. That's where we're headed in the next couple of years or so. That's how I would put it after synthesizing a whole bunch of information from a bunch of other folks, including notably Professor Guy McPherson. So actually, he's another one who I would want on the advisory board. And but not as a solutionary, but as one who has done an amazing job in identifying and synthesizing and summing up the work of very accomplished published scientists from multiple disciplines throughout the world, all pertaining to the, at last count, if I recall correctly, 69 self-reinforcing feedback loops, all pushing us inexorably towards this hothouse state. So that's where we're headed. We're headed there very quickly. We've got very limited time in which to build out these Homer's Arks, Arcologies for the future, for survival. Also, Michael Gallo. I nominate Michael Gallo as well as the other Michael who was on this hangout. So that's 3 Michaels. Doctors in Utopia, my girlfriend Melissa Koch. You know, there's a bunch of folks that we need to bring in to be part of the advisory board. So let's think about that, and let's get the board together. Let's have a series of public meetings and start to hash this out, because we're at that point. We're at that critical point. And if we don't do something like this, I think our own extinction is essentially inevitable. So the Arcologies are not just to save other life, it's also to save human life. How much of humanity, what percentage of humanity is going to make it through the bottleneck and be part of one of these Arcologies, I fear it will not be a very large percentage of humanity, frankly, just given how inhospitable hothouse state is going to be for humanity. We're basically talking about a whole series did you know, human architected see what Arcology is. It's a mashup between architecture and ecology. That's Arcology. And it's just a very happy coincidence that the first 3 letters are ARC or Ark, hence Homer's Ark. Homer's Ark also being derived from the imperative for shutting down nuclear. But the imperative for being a custodian, a transporter, at a minimum, of, you know, species from one zone or region or, you know, latitude, longitude combination of planet Earth to another, that's a big deal, especially when we talk about transporting entire ecosystems. Wow. I mean, I don't even know if, well, to say I don't know if we can, I'd be dishonest, because I do believe that we can. Figuring out how is going to take radical collective intelligence. And that's the topic of many other videos, notably the recent one called Defying Death at the End of the World, which I highly recommend, by the way. I also highly recommend the series Social Club at the End of the World, in which we delve into a bunch of this stuff. And I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of this stuff tomorrow. In a little over 11 hours, we're going to have, no, sorry, in a little over 9 hours, we're going to record our next Social Club at the End of the World. It's almost 1 in the morning here in Seattle. 12:39 on Tuesday, January 9th. Though we started on January 8th. Though for Michael, it was the 9th already. Whew. You see, this is what happens when people, you know, I didn't even know that we were going to get onto the topic of Arcologies. It just emerged out of our conversation talking about the urgency of, so this shows you the power of conversation and the power of recording the conversation. and making it public. And of course, you know, the files that constitute this recording will be able to be picked through by artificial intelligence. They'll be able to transcribe every word, and other metadata such as gestures and tone of voice and all that. Be able to transcribe all that into the appropriate digital form. That will be able to be indexed and mapped. All the good stuff I talk about in the episode 1 of Defying Death at the End of the World. So please enjoy that. You'll see how it all fits together. And, you know, what could be more exciting? What could be more urgent? And just to give a name of the transplanting of organisms from one location to another, let's call it Operation Floating Coconut, because it's the floating coconuts that transported coconuts all throughout the Pacific. So, you know, the mechanism of transport was, in this case, built into the fruit itself, the coconut. So these coconuts would happily float around the Pacific Ocean and just hit island after island. Think the opening scenes of, you know, and the Empire Strikes Back, where they're sending out all those probes. Operation Floating Coconut. I also want to point out that there occurs to me a really, you know, one big question is, well, who's going to pay for all these arcologies? Blah, 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 blah. Right? If you know, if most of the population doesn't even understand the urgency of them, and you know, and currently, you know, if you don't have the support of at least a majority, it's very hard to get anything done. You really need a big supermajority. Well, I think it's going to be a while till we get to that point, just because of, you know, the stupidity of humanity and the, you know, the extreme social nature of humans, that we're just so drawn to the, you know, what's commonly believed by the rest of the primates in our tribe or community or whatever. So it's very, very hard to believe that, you know, a super majority of humanity will get it anytime soon. I think it'll be, you know, we'll be already flying over the edge of the cliff at that point, without having popped open the back door of the van and shoved out a few arcologies to survive. If they survive their MacGyver-like roll through the dust and gravel and don't go over the edge of the cliff themselves, which is a very real possibility. These can have to be very well designed arcologies. So anyway, but so if we're not going to get a super majority until it's too late of humanity supporting these, how do we do it? Well, just consider, among many other vectors pushing to make this happen, just consider, take the case of a typical billionaire. And I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of billionaires there are in the world today, but there's way too many. But take the case of a typical billionaire. Maybe they got net worth of a couple $billion or something, right? Maximum they're going to spend, you know, maximum they're going to spend 100 million, you know, on some big underground bunker, right? More likely they went and bought some island somewhere, like in the San Juans or wherever, thinking that they'll be able to kind of ride it out there. But all those folks are sadly mistaken. You really need, we're going to really need some incredible infrastructure to be able to survive the hothouse of plus 10 degrees C, which we'd hit in just a few years. So underground bunkers, maximum 100 million bucks they're going to throw into that. All right. And so what are they going to do with the other 1.9 billion of their net worth, right? Well, check it out. Imagine they become a very public contributor to Homer's Arks, right? This network of arcologies that we're talking about. If that happens, and then let's say, you know, years go by, and, you know, the Homer's Arks are successful at shutting down nuclear and transplanting ecosystems, and the world is now, at least life is surviving. It's still a pretty unfriendly place for humans. When they finally come out of their bunker, right, are they going to want to be known as the billionaire who donated, you know, 50% of their net worth to the Arcology project, a whole $1 billion they donated to the Arcology project? Or are they going to want to be known as the billionaire who was stingy and didn't give a penny? Right? Just contemplate that, right? The obvious answer is cha-ching, we're going to get a lot of donations from a lot of billionaires, right? And I would say sizable donations. So I think we're not gonna be hurting for the lack of funds, and not just billionaires. Shoot, I'll break out the checkbook. I'm not a billionaire, but I'll break out the checkbook and make some contributions. And therein lies another key. It's not just financial contributions that are valued here. It's intellectual contributions. So be one of the early pioneers in the movement, right? Be an advisor, be a consultant, just be a participant. Just jump in, submit your comments, post a video of your own, get together with some friends or colleagues or relatives or whoever, all the above, and just start talking about this. Talk about different facets of it. What should be the criteria for who gets to live in a certain ecology? I don't know, but certainly the people who pioneer them, I think, will improve their odds at a minimum of being inside one of these arcologies if they want to. Look, not everyone is going to want to be part of a Homer's Ark, right? Life may be pretty hard in a lot of ways, and ultimately you're going to be co-located with a nuclear power plant, which could go Fukushima, and if it does, so it's kind of like you're standing right in front of the loaded gun. That beautiful image of Guy McPherson uses in some of his presentations comes to mind. Civilization is the handguns pointing in the face of nature, of Mother Nature. Well, now the tables have been turned. Now the handgun is pointing at us if you live in an arcology that's co-located with a nuclear power plant. But I say those arcologies should be the most weather resistant, the most complete, the most stocked for the long run. It may take us 50 years to shut down a given nuclear power plant, for all I know, right? Well, let's make sure we got 50 years of food in there for the members of the arcology. And whole families will be able, in fact, we need families. We want to have any chance of surviving multi-generationally. And it may take us centuries to really successfully transplant and nurture enough species and ecosystems and shut down enough power plants and decommission, and safely store the parts of nuclear warheads and whatnot that we take apart. We're really talking about what will become a new form of world governance, not government, governance. There's a difference. And to figure all that out, let's get Noam Chomsky in here and a bunch of his buddies and colleagues who, and just a bunch of folks who are just really down on governance, like Jay Gehring is a buddy and colleague of mine who's really good at this stuff. So let's get him. Let's get the Emperor of Japan, my brother Takuya Sato, the leader of the hemp industry in Japan. But hemp is just going to be one of those really important crops, partly because it literally is a weed. So cannabis is not called weed for no reason. It's called weed because the plant cannabis, which is hemp, literally is a weed. So that's going to be one of the survivors. So we need to figure out where to spread the hemp seeds. And the cool thing about that is we can just drop the hemp seeds by drone. See, that'll be another cool thing that the arcologies can do. They can be airports for drones. Let's get my buddy Will on the case, who's come up with a whole platform for unpersoned aircraft. I was about to say unmanned, but that's not PC. You got to be PC these days if you want to survive. So, my goodness, the possibilities are endless. Anyway, just think about it. Imagine a world covered with arcologies that have these, multiple missions. Decommission nuclear safely. Repopulate species so that they can survive. Not because we want to play God, but because we want the species to survive. So, these are things we can do with technology such as drones and, thank God for those who did Biosphere 2. Again, Michael Gosney, Doctors in Utopia, many others who, not necessarily financed it or built it, but had played a role. Doctors in Utopia has studied so many arcologies. Michael Gosney is really super awesome at, understanding and studying and documenting and actually bringing together intentional communities throughout the world, right? Arcologies are examples of intentional communities. There are many others, but see, I think we're going to need to draw on the expertise of all these intentional communities as we, co-create the new culture for humanity, the new culture for this global network of arcologies, the Homer's Arks of the world. And all these intentional communities are going to be needed to bring in their expertise related to culture. Because each of these intentional communities ends up creating their own culture, right? Of course, borrowing from previous cultures and in many cases mashing up, but in all cases, co-creating something new, a new culture. And, there are intentional communities in India, in the United States, in Canada, and South America, all over the place, really. Intentional communities, people who come together with a common vision, a common purpose. And so anyway, we've got lots of great models to draw on. We've got models of actual arcologies like Biosphere 2, Arcosanti, and a handful of others, maybe many others. Because it's not just full-fledged arcologies, but, greenhouse agriculture and indoor agriculture are going to, be crucial technologies for arcologies. Solar, all the solar stuff, let's get Elon Musk in on the conversation. I know he's quite passionate about this because, look, what's he trying to do? Get some people to populate Mars, essentially build arcologies on Mars. Look, if we can even have conversations about building arcologies on Mars, how much easier is it to build arcologies on our own planet? So let's get on with it. We may not be the first people that, well, look, a lot of the folks who pioneered arcologies had, I would say a similar vision as to what we're talking about. I don't know if anyone talked about nuclear specifically, or transplanting species. I think it's more about just like containing, the cancer of humanity. Because with arcologies, it's regenerative. It's actually healing to Mother Earth. That's the ideal design of an arcology. It's actually healing to Mother Earth rather than harming Mother Earth. And that also gets back to the question, is humanity worth preserving? The current invisible hand is not worth preserving. So let's swap that out for a hand of compassion and unity, bringing us together to co-create these arcologies for the two big benevolent means or goals that we talked about: getting rid of nukes and distributing organisms and ecosystems, and many other goals, missions, purposes. We're going to be multi-mission. Anyway, I believe this is the first time that such a big vision has been articulated publicly, and love to hear of other examples of big visions. Let's bring in all the big visionaries. Also, Pinchbeck, who wrote How Soon Is Now. We need to get him on board. And there's a whole bunch of folks who we need to bring in. So anyway, in your comments, please suggest who you would like invited into this conversation about arcologies, a planetary network of arcologies, to achieve many things that Mother Earth cannot do for herself, and certainly will not be able to do for herself in the state to which we are bringing her, with the combination and compound effects, highly nonlinear in many cases, compound effects of 69 self-reinforcing feedback loops, all pushing us towards the hothouse state. We're almost there. It's almost the end. Let's do whatever we need to do to bring to fruition this network of arcologies to save life on Earth. and perhaps in the universe. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment very liberally, and we'll look forward to the next episode of Homer's Ark, or whatever we end up calling this. Thank you so much. Arigato gozaimasu.